Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about exploring Agile, and it'll be a good, probably refresher if you've been deep in Agile. Maybe bring up some concepts and things that will be interesting, hopefully. But first, I want to see how we're doing on our just interesting poll here. Let me put this in the link one more time. So go and join this. We'll be using this some as we go through, particularly looking at some of the different aspects of Agile and getting, trying to get an idea of how some of these things rank for people. So very helpful if you're in part of this. But if you had to choose, which would you be most willing to do without? I'm guessing the people that are here on saying, if you're saying air conditioning, you probably do not live where I live, because that's a pretty difficult thing right now to go without. It's starting to cool down finally, so that was a nice change. Okay, interesting. Most of the biggest thing here is a computer. So that's I wasn't expecting that, but that's interesting, particularly for the segment that's usually here. Okay, so one other quick question then. Would you rather lose all your money or all your pictures? And I keep the window open because we'll be using it as we go. I'm just using this to get people signed up so we can do it. It may depend on how much money you have, I guess, probably, or how valuable your pictures are. If you have kids, you might be a little bit more willing or a little less willing to give up all your pictures. But even if you don't want to vote on this one, go and click that link to get it up just so you'll have it, and we'll start here. Okay, so it looks like most of us are willing to give up most of our pictures, but some of us are in the camp of our pictures are very valuable to us. Let me make one change here real fast. Just make sure everybody's muted so nothing unexpected happens. Okay, so let's so we're going to be talking about exploring Agile, but first let me give you an idea of what's coming up. So here's where we are today. And next week we have Aaron Blythe is going to be talking about, Aaron works at Google, and he's going to be coming talking to us about generative AI. So talking about some things Google's doing with it, but particularly from a standpoint of if you're kind of in the Agile space and producing software, how can we think about generative AI and what it means for what you do as an Agile practitioner or somebody in the software development space. So I'm really looking forward to this talk. I'll send the invite out here in a little bit. If you know anybody on your team that would be interested in hearing anything about what Google's doing with AI, hearing how AI relates to Agile, or hearing how AI might relate to the future, their future careers in software development, please forward this invite on to them. I'd love to take advantage of Aaron being here and get as many people as possible that might be interested. And then a few weeks after that, 24th of September, Robert Herbrig is going to be talking to us about managing uncertainty. And I love his title. Can we learn to manage uncertainty? Well, probably. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that one as well. And then on the 22nd of, October, we've got Eric Lee is going to be coming. He works for Amazon. He's going to be coming talking to us about machine learning, particularly as it relates to Deep Racer. So Deep Racer is looks like a little remote control car that you can train with a machine learning model, and then they have competitions where they race these things. So he's going to be talking to us some about what that looks like, how machine learning works, how it applies to the Deep Racer specifically. But I think there'll be a lot of interesting things there for people that are just working in the software space, even if you're not very familiar with machine learning or a lot of things in that area, just kind of getting to see how some of that looks, and how machine learning and artificial intelligence is getting applied to real world problems. Well, in this case, the problem of running a car with a camera around a track as fast as possible, but has a lot of implications for the self-driving cars and other things that are coming in the future. So those are the few things we've got coming up. We've also got Matt Rabel who's going to be coming and talking to us about microservices and micro front ends, still trying to nail down the date on that. And then Matt Phillips is going to be coming and talking to us in December about a to be determined topic. But he's always been a lot of fun to have on, so looking forward to that as well. Okay, so that's what's coming up. Like I said, you can get to these from events.agilelnl.com if you want to make sure you get one of those on your calendar, but you can also get to them from the invites. If you come to this, the invites will go out to that. Yes, asking tough questions today. Well, let's look at Agile, and we will actually, let me get back here and make sure I am in the right place. Okay, so fill this out as we talk a little bit, and then we'll come back to it in just a second. So you've got different ways to rank why you think software projects fail, and then we'll be kind of talking a little bit about that. So we're going to be talking about some of the problems of creating software. First, let's talk about what waterfall is. And waterfall is basically came out of the way that we build buildings and launch spaceships, and said, let's take those principles and apply it to creating software, which was not a crazy thing to do, right? Because that's the closest analogy we had for building software. But if you look at the Agile Manifesto, where it talks about we're learning better ways to do things, we found out that approach doesn't take advantage of some of the inherent some of the inherent advantages that software has over doing things with bricks and mortar and physical things. And it puts us in position, if we're taking a waterfall approach, it puts us in position where we end up waiting a lot longer for value than we would if we tried to embrace that software is very different than building something. It also puts us in a situation where we often delay waiting for evidence of stuff, and creates a lot of lack of flexibility. So these are the problems we often run into with a waterfall approach. It doesn't mean that there's no value in waterfall, but we want to make sure we're not taking a paradigm that worked really well for building buildings for 1,000 years, and we've got software, we're just saying, yes, let's do the exact same thing, without realizing that there may be we may want to approach things differently. This type of shift, if you think about it, the shift from building things out of cutting stone to build a building to the point that you're able to actually pour concrete also required very big shifts in how we built stuff and how we planned for building things. So we just as we approach new things as a human race of dealing with different things than what we've faced before, we need to make sure that our ways of managing those things isn't relying on an older model that doesn't take advantage of what we can do today. Okay, so that's waterfall. So one of the big issues we have with waterfall is an issue of trust. And oftentimes we think of trust as we will trust somebody who does something big for us more than somebody that does something little for us. So imagine somebody that you dropped a book and they picked it up for you and handed it to you. Well, that establishes on some level some type of trust, maybe not super big. Now, consider that versus somebody that you were about to do something, walk out in the street in front of a car, and they grab you and pull you back and save your life. Well, we would think that the person that saved your life is going to have established more trust with you, and that is true. But what's even more important is the frequency more than the magnitude. So the person that saved your life once 10 years ago versus someone that shows up every day to help you with something, you're going to have a lot more trust with the person that's been there for you every single day, even if the thing that they were doing was very, very small. And what I want to bring up with this, it creates this type of, back on the trust thing, that type of trust creates the frequency of regularly doing things that are trustworthy, creates trust in ways that you don't get if there was just something really big that happened years ago. And this is really, really important because oftentimes as a software developer, I tend to think in terms of, I'm going to give the users all these things and we'll establish great trust because 2 years from now, I'll give them a whole bunch of things they can start working with. Or 2 years ago, I gave them a bunch of stuff that they were able to do really cool things with. But that's not how trust actually works. And if I'm able to give them small things on a frequent basis that makes their life a little bit better, like every week giving them something that's just a little bit better than what they had before, that's going to establish a lot more trust than if I give them something really, really big. Waterfall is not usually set up to do this. Waterfall is based on the idea that you can't get value from something until you've got all of it or a large percentage of it. And so software lets us give things in much more incremental ways. So we have the ability to establish trust much more early on, and by leveraging the fact that frequency is a bigger indicator for us than trust, or a bigger creator of trust than magnitude. So another piece of trust is having actual evidence of success. If you're working with a team that says they'll give you something in 2 years, and you're going to defer getting evidence of success for 2 years, that doesn't establish a lot of trust with the team, or it shouldn't, because they haven't proven themselves yet. On the other hand, if they're able to do things more rapidly, you're going to be able to get trust if they're able to produce evidence of their success as they go. Another big piece of establishing trust is creating evidence that you can handle failures. So this is as our kids get older, this is something my wife and I have been talking about, is how do we go ahead and give them the ability to have failures that will show us that they can handle failures, but also give them the confidence to handle failures. And if you've ever worked on a big project that they're making incremental progress, they're at 10% and then 15% all the way up, years into it, and then they're at 90% that they're complete, and then everything just pauses, right? Because that last 10% ends up taking as long as the first 90%. Well, oftentimes that's because one thing, it means the way that they're showing success probably isn't actually success all the way through. But it's also often an issue that they're not actually giving evidence of handling small failures. Something doesn't get done all the way they want, kind of gets swept under the rug, and the percentage actually goes up some. In establishing trust for agile teams, we want to be in positions to where we're having that conversation with the stakeholders of, hey, we tried this for a week. It turns out this way of working does not work very well. We're going to try something else. And if you're working with a team and you're seeing those types of things happen where they tried something, didn't work, and they're rapidly switching to other things, you're going to start having evidence of handling small failures. And that's going to build a lot of trust with the stakeholders, with the users, because it shows that there is it shows I'd rather trust someone who's shown me that, yes, if something fails, I'm going to tell you about it early and often and how we're correcting it and that we're going to get away from that, than someone that just has no failures at all, which makes me very suspicious that maybe I'm just not being told about it. So these are just some things to think about when we're thinking about trust. And for a lot of teams, these types of things are a big problem, where we're not wanting to communicate small failures and get feedback and readjust. We're not good sometimes at creating evidence of success, and often we're focused on the magnitude of what's being delivered rather than the frequency. So let's look at an example. This is a Treasury system that I wasn't actually a system for the U.S. Treasury. I didn't work with this particular thing, although I have worked I have worked with teams that have struggled with very similar things to this. But they brought me in at one point to just kind of give an overview. What would you do in this situation? So I wrote up and said, here's what I would do if you wanted to bring me in. Most of the stuff you can do yourself if you want to run with it. And they didn't take any of my advice. But this is what ended up happening to the project. The project was in a situation where they had no evidence of delivering working code. And they kept building things and saying that they were the government had brought in an outside consulting firm for this, and they were doing all the development work. And they kept saying, okay, we're at 1%, we're 2%, and we're going up, but they never were giving anything that was actually getting out to where it was getting used by the users that were really going to use the system. They also had no evidence of quality, because every time they would make a change to the application, and the testers would go through and usually find 2 or 3 things or more that were actually broken in the thing that they had delivered, or broke other capabilities that they had before. So if you looked at the percentage of progress they were making on working on the stories that had been established, it looked like things were going up. But if you looked at the whole backlog, including the things that had broken that they needed to fix, they were actually going backwards, because they were creating more work faster than they were getting through with work. You ask about the slides. The video will be up on YouTube at the end. I'm after streaming there right now. If you're wanting something beyond that, let me know, and I can see if these will export to PDF. Just send me an email, reply to something I've sent you, and I'll see if what I can do. Anyway, this particular thing, so it was like they were working backwards, but they were also creating an adversarial relationships between the users that were going to use the software that weren't being shown anything, the stakeholders that had hired this outside firm, and then the people that were doing the development work. Eventually, the project, after spending millions and millions of dollars, was canceled, and last I heard, they were moving into what they referred to as the litigation phase of software development, where it's failed, and now we're going to sue people for not doing what we thought they were supposed to do. And this is not a problem limited to the U.S. Treasury. This is something that just inherently happens very easily in software development, particularly if we're kind of taking this waterfall approach. And these are the types of problems that Agile and Lean and things around that space are meant to actually solve, and can actually help. The Agile principles can help you steer away from these types of problems. Okay, so now let's look over. I want to jump back and see how see what we're getting on here. Let me put this link here one more time in case anybody hasn't seen it yet. So go ahead and click on that. I'm just want to see what people think makes software projects fail. And it looks like the majority of us here are saying we think it's we're weighting everything toward it being unclear requirements. And I think there is some truth to that, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. Go ahead and click on that link if you haven't actually pulled on here. Interesting here that weak developers is not the biggest thing. It's not a matter of we don't have the right people involved. It's that there's unclear requirements or inability to deliver value early on. Unclear requirements can mean a lot of different things. I maybe should expand this graph to include some other stuff. But that's interesting. We're going to talk about stuff as we go. And hopefully by the end of this talk, we may actually, if I've shifted some of you to where the inability to deliver value early on may actually be a bigger indicator of our ability to actually meet requirements. So that's what we'll kind of be looking at here. Okay, so laid out the problem, let's talk about the solution. So if you think about that's, I described kind of where things have been in the past and what does tomorrow look like. And when I'm saying tomorrow, I think of software development as being, we may have been doing this for 50 years, but we're still a pretty new, it's still a pretty new discipline. There's lots of things we should be learning as we go. So let's talk about trust. So how can we create trust early on? Well, we can do trustworthy things. Do trustworthy things very, very frequently to create trust and to create evidence that we know how to handle things. And the way that we do trustworthy things is we deliver working code. And we define working code as being code that actually makes the user's life easier in some way that they can actually use to help them do their jobs better. That's the type of thing that really builds trust. Now, you may be in a situation where you've got to build something that can't be used right away, and that's going to happen sometimes. But oftentimes, we have the ability to get things into production. Oftentimes, it is possible to use part of something before we deliver everything, but we don't do it because that's not how we're often wired, and that's not how organizations are usually set up, is to take advantage of that type of stuff. So trust, well, what about evidence? Well, iterative delivery is the process of creating evidence that we can actually deliver, particularly, like I said, if we can get stuff through and into production. We want evidence. So show me what the software is doing. Don't just tell me what you're going to do. I've worked with projects that were very, very big on, they had a big plan of what they were going to do. And they were trying to deliver on the plan, and everything took a little bit longer than expected. And then the plan that they had built, because they weren't trying to deliver, in some cases, some parts of things weren't trying to deliver things all the way through that the user could actually use and experience. They were trying to build all the foundational stuff, even spending a year building foundational stuff before the user could use it. And what they were in the situation doing is telling the users what they were doing and what they had built. And in this particular case I'm thinking of, the kind of segment that was showing the users what they built was getting a lot further, because the ones that were just telling them what they built got into situations where they kept telling them what they had built, and then when they got it into the user's hands, tried to use it or tried to build the piece that the user would use, they discovered a lot of it wasn't actually fit for purpose, didn't actually meet the user's needs, or didn't even meet the developer's needs that they had built stuff for, because they weren't building something all the way through that they could show to the customer. So show me, don't tell me. Show me the software, let me actually use it. That's a way to create evidence to establish trust. This is a saying that I think is very worth remembering, is deliver something before you deliver everything. Because if I'm waiting to deliver everything, or a really big chunk, I'm deferring that point where I can actually make trust. I'm deferring that point where I can say, oh, you know what, this doesn't work. It's not what we need to readjust, and we made a mistake, and that's fine because we can fix it. Okay, and so example of this is actually another treasury project that I worked on. It had originally been quoted out at 50 developers, and we ended up delivering their software with 10 developers. It had been originally quoted to take 5 years to go live, and we were able to do it in 4. And it was also originally quoted to cost $50 million, and we were able to do it for 15. And this project was for, as a matter of fact, I think it continues. I think it's been live for 5 or 6 years now. Originally they were dealing with 6-month deployment cycles, and they got down to where they can deploy in a few hours, but for the past 5 years I think they've deployed every 7 days on average, new software all the way through. This is a much better situation than the previous problem that I described, where everything was based on waterfall. Most of us would be much happier working on a project like this than the previous one I just described. Okay, so that kind of describes the solution. What I'm going to lay out here is here's how the Agile principles and values really relate to those types of solutions. So here's the values, short versions of them. We've got focusing on individual interactions, focusing on working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. So individuals and interactions as being more valuable than processes and tools. It doesn't mean that we don't have tools, right? We're not trying to somehow eke out our code in the dirt or take a magnetic pin and get it. We're using tools. We want to have good tools. We want to have good processes for what we do. But what we don't want to do is get so focused on valuing our processes and tools that we overlook the fact that we're dealing with individuals and individuals are valuable, and overlook the fact that the interactions are really what we want to make happen. Let's see, there's a question here I want to see. Okay, so I see there's a question here about skill level can increase. So to me, it wasn't a large impact, but it's still an impact. Good point. And then Ian pointed out that a lot of teams aren't doing products that require top quality developers. I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I think sometimes what we forget is below a certain level, or some developers can not just go a little bit slower for the team, but actually slow the team down. So you need some level of skill, but the way that you actually approach development, like rapid feedback and stuff like that, oftentimes is even more important than this above a certain point than the skill level of a particular developer on that team. Skill level is an interesting thing, and it could be an entire different talk about that. But if you have somebody that's really skilled at something, or a few people that are very, very skilled at something, I've seen a pair of people, two people working on something that are really good developers. Doesn't mean that they are geniuses, but are really good, solid developers and are masters of the language that they're working in. And with a really good process that has rapid feedback and good access to the customers, can out-deliver 50 developers that have a bad process with a mediocre understanding of their tools and their language. There's that type of scale that can happen, because in the 50 developers, you're probably going to have just a few that are carrying things forward, and a lot of other people that are getting in the way inadvertently with best intentions and stuff, but they're not really set up for success. That's very... I'll get off on things if I start getting that too far. So anyway, let's talk about this. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Doesn't mean that we don't want to document anything, but if we focus so much on comprehensive documentation that we don't deliver any working software, that's going to be a failure. Now, I was going through this one time with a large bank in New York, and I had somebody stand up. They said, I completely disagree with that. And I said, it doesn't mean that we're not going to document anything. It just means that we're going to value working software over the comprehensive documentation. And the guy was like, no, absolutely not. I said, okay, that's different, because most of us would agree that having the software do what it's supposed to is more valuable than maybe having reams of documentation. He said, no, you have to have the documentation, really good documentation, because you need to know who to blame when it doesn't work. And he was probably correctly describing the environment that he was working in. So it wasn't that he was being irrational, but that environment was leading to situations where the organization was having a very hard time producing software at all, because there was more focus put on let's document stuff so we can know who to blame than there was on actually getting software that worked for the user. Okay, customer collaboration. We're going to value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. That our values are going to put customer collaboration over negotiating the contract. Doesn't mean we're not going to have contracts, doesn't mean we're not going to negotiate it, but we want to move toward and try to prioritize working directly with the customer. There are situations where I've seen people spend so much time negotiating the contract that the customer decides it's not even worth it to get what they actually want, even if the thing that they're actually asking for is so small that by the time you decide you need to contract negotiate, you've already spent more time on it than would be just to go and do what the customer is saying they need to do if you were to collaborate with them. Oftentimes, I see organizations set up specifically to avoid collaborating with the customer, and it's so unintuitive if you've been in an organization that tries to separate the customer from the developers because you don't want to disturb the developers or something. This is a hard thing. And I know Agile has been around for a long time. People have heard this. But if you really look how organizations are behaving, oftentimes customer collaboration is not nearly as important to them as contract negotiation. And then final value of responding to change. We want to value responding to change over following a plan. In other words, if we have a plan that says we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and things have changed and maybe X is not valuable anymore, going ahead and delivering X instead of collaborating with the customer and deciding, okay, let's stop doing that and let's work on Y and Z because those are still valuable. We want to be in a situation where it's easy, encouraged, and very natural to respond to the change instead of just following, oh, here's what we said we're going to do, and we're going to do it whether it's a good idea or not. Okay, so those are, whoops, oh, yeah, I forgot I had some pictures. So here's an example of, they had a plan, and the plan was to put that board there. They got there and discovered that there was a ladder in the way. So instead of responding to change and maybe moving the ladder, they're like, nope, that board is going here. We're not going to respond to change. We're just going to follow our plan, including producing something like this. Now, I've talked to some people in construction, and they said this looks like a situation where at one point they moved a ladder and got yelled at for it. So like, okay, we're not going to move the ladder anymore. It's easy to see something like this and laugh at it when it's, in the physical world. But this is a pretty common thing to have happen in software where you're doing things that are very, very similar to this because we're so focused on following our plan that we're not willing to respond to change. We're so focused on trying to deliver things in this particular way that we don't stop and ask ourselves, do I know more information now that would mean it's better to do this a little bit differently? Okay, so there we've got the Agile values. I'm going to jump back over here to Mentimeter. Wait, am I in the right place? Oops. Sorry, I'm learning my my buttons. Okay. So in terms of how important they are for creating successful software, go ahead and rank these. There's not a right or wrong answer, but what I'd like to see is just in your experience, which of these things are at the top of, if we get this right, it has the biggest impact, down to the one that we say, this one seems to have less impact in your experience when you've been working with software teams. And like I said, no right or wrong answer, but bring up, I just threw the link there again. Go and bring that up and leave your window up because we'll be using this as we go. I just want to see what people are experiencing. And these can be very different from project to project. So this is a very loose, unscientific poll. It's interesting. Let's see how many people. Well, we got 20 people voted. Okay. So responding to change is what people have at the top. So it sounds like a lot of us have been in situations where we were building things that we knew were not the right thing, or we were doing stuff that we knew wasn't the right thing to do, but we weren't responding to the change that had happened. I was in a call earlier this morning, and somebody was citing some statistics from a study that had been done, and they said that 45% of the features, and I think they were measuring it in terms of code, but the features that were being built for users were never used by the user. And I wonder how much of that happens because we weren't responding to change correctly. Could also happen because we weren't collaborating with the customer to figure out what was actually valuable to them. Okay, so this is like I said, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think that is interesting, and interesting just kind of see where people are placing things here. Let's see, hit the right button. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go through the principles, and I'm going to leave that up on the Mentimeter so you can go to it if you want. We're going to look at the 4 principles and then kind of rank how important you feel they are and how easy they are to implement in your situation. So let me throw this link up here one more time. Let's look at these. Okay, so first principle, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. If your team is doing this, that's great. I've been in a lot of places where, although we say we're doing this, there are a whole lot of other things that are a higher priority than actually giving the customer working software that they can do stuff with. Next principle, changing requirements. We welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. This is really hard to do. If you ask me as a developer to build something for you, and I work on it for 2 or 3 days and come back and get ready to show it to you, and you're like, yeah, that's not really what I want anymore. Well, things have changed. We want to do something different. Um, that might make me not feel good if I see my value as being I write the software that you've asked for. However, on the other hand, if I see myself as part of if I see myself as part of a team that our goal is to actually deliver the business value, and you ask for one thing and things changed and I need to adapt it, or maybe it's a matter of I should have asked more questions as I got into things because I noticed this and I understood the business and I didn't ask as I went through saying, I'm not sure this is really what you want. Um, I'm much more, I'll be in a much better position to actually welcome changing requirements instead of just dealing with them. Short time scale. Delivering working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to the shorter time scale. This gets down to and back when the Agile Manifesto was written, the idea of doing something for a couple of weeks was seen as really, really fast. Nowadays, we've got the tools, and a lot of companies have found that doing things, sometimes even in a matter of hours, delivering things, is good for their business because we found ways to lower the overhead that we used to have that made things take a couple of weeks. And working together. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Once again, this is something that it's easy to say, and this can be very, very valuable. But I've been in a lot of situations where they have structured their organizations specifically to make sure that the business people and developers do not have to talk to each other. We often get in situations, and actually I see somebody just said that 45% of the features not used. Let's see. It may be that their request. That's good question, Ian. Is that a matter of their feel they need to get it in sooner? I think a lot of times it's because of something like this, that the business people ask for something and try to plan out all their requirements ahead of time. And then as the developers are building stuff, they end up solving the problems in different ways, or it turns out not to actually be an issue once they get into it. When the business people and developers are really working together daily, saying, here's our next story we're starting on, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and the developers feel empowered to ask the business question and the business feels very comfortable having the conversation with the developers, what I find is a very large, I was going to say 50%, but I'm not going to, I'll be making up numbers, but a very large percentage of what developers will build if they're just handled a requirements document goes away if you're actually working directly with the business people like this. I've seen many times where what the business was asking for, the developers are like, you're asking for this, but do you realize that Excel can do this? Um, like a simple example of we need all these reports sorted by these different ways and this and a huge amount of reporting capability in there. And if the business and the developers are talking to each other and the developers say, hey, we'd be happy to build this for you. But if we just give you all the data in a CSV format or an Excel format, is this stuff that's just easier for you to do in Excel than us trying to build a way to do it in the browser? And those types of conversations can get rid of huge amounts of effort that are huge amounts of efforts that are being done in place of the things that are necessary to actually give the business value. So that's where this becomes so very, very important in making sure that interaction is happening, that there's trust there, and that those conversations can actually occur. How much of this is because they end up talking to business analysts instead of end users? Yes, I think that is a big issue as well, particularly when you have, and business analysts can fill an awesome role. When users are asking for something, sometimes it's hard for them to really say what they want, and business analysts can do a great job of digging into that. On the other hand, business analysts oftentimes will tell the developers exactly what the users said that they wanted. And sometimes what the users say they want is not at all what they want. They just have one view of it. And that's where having the developers and the users actually kind of talk to each other and play back and forth. The developers saying, okay, I understand you're asking for this, and I think this is what you're describing, but I don't understand why you want this. I don't understand the business value of this. And having that conversation can really refine things because it may be that the developer doesn't understand it. It may be that the users are using some terminology that means one thing to developers and very different things to them. Those type of conversations are how we often think of development, being efficient in development is producing more code faster. I would suggest that the lowest hanging fruit is to stop producing code that it turns out we don't need, or producing code that does 3 things when the piece of it that they really need first is this one thing, and the other 2 can be deprioritized upon the backlog for later because they're coming at the expense of something that the users actually see as being more important. Okay, so from there, let's jump back now to see how people rated these things. And it looks like we're saying that really, as far as being important to our success, and somebody pointed out there may not be a lot of statistical, how many people we got? 22 answers. These are all pretty close, but generally what we're feeling is satisfying the customer through early and continuous delivery of software is the thing that we're ranking as the highest. The thing that is also important, but that everyone's saying is the hardest to follow, is actually welcoming changing requirements, even late in development. So that's interesting that that's the thing that we're saying is the hardest to actually do. I think a lot of organizations are set up that in ways that make this really, really hard because we want people to commit to you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to take this long. And we're going to judge you based on your ability to deliver X, Y, and Z in this amount of time, even if it turns out that it was a dumb idea to do that, and we know it halfway through, and we go ahead and do it. So that's where where we're feeling these kind of things fall. Like I said, there may not be a whole bunch of statistical. We're not a huge sample size here. The 24 is reasonably good, but I think it's interesting to see where other people are saying these things actually occur for them. And there's quite a bit spread on this one. Most everybody says it's very important to their success. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Somebody here says it's not important and not difficult to follow. They may be the business and developer all wrapped up into one, so that might look a little bit different from them. I think this is interesting how much of a spread there is on it being difficult to follow. And different environments are going to make this harder or easier, depending on the size of the team, the personalities of the people involved, and how much effort the organization has put into trying to keep the business people and developers from talking to each other. Oh, okay. Here, hang on. Let me go on. Make sure I'm on the road. Okay. So I'll move to the next set here, and we'll go and talk about those. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. Now, I've seen teams try to use this principle to the trust them to give the job done. I've seen teams try to use this principle to basically not follow any of the other Agile principles. We want to trust them to get the job done, yes, but we also want them to be making frequently delivery of valuable things to the customer. So this doesn't, we can't pull this one out and say, oh, the developers want to work on it for a year before they actually deliver anything to the customer, and we're going to just trust them to get the job done. That's not going to work out for their advantage or for the users. We have to look at all the principles together. Whoops. Face-to-face communication. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. This has been pretty interesting to see as we went into COVID and then after that with more of the work from home, how many teams just were like, yeah, we're just not going to do this. I've seen some teams did this very, very well, but I saw a lot of teams that they were only willing to follow this from a standpoint of we'll have meetings online, we'll schedule lots of meetings where everybody look at each other, where everybody's required to be on video. The teams I've seen most effective at this are trying to recreate the idea of being in a room together and I can have conversations with you. If I want to come talk to somebody, I know where to go. I can go to the team room with the developers and have a conversation about something instead of trying to schedule a meeting. Which is why when I've seen remote teams, the ones that get the most out of this using this principle usually have some type of video team room where people are just kind of hanging out, and you can go find the developers there and they're all working on things, but just like walking into a physical room, you can go in, ask a question, and or find out what's going on in ways that aren't really in ways that are much more akin to just being physically present and being able to walk in and talk to somebody. The idea of more people using chat instead of meeting. First of all, I think meetings are highly disruptive. So if the chat is the only way you can get away from meetings, I think that's great. I find the chat and video team room work really, really well together because in a video team room, you can't have like 10 conversations going back and forth at the same time as well. But with chat, you can. So chat gives you the ability to whisper in a virtual team room that you would have if you were in a physical room. Is what I found it works well for. Also lets people kind of stay engaged of what's going on over here if they have to go somewhere else to another meeting or something. It's not like they're just gone completely. Anyway, there's a lot. That could be a whole talk of things. I've got some talks on that. Got a bunch of T-shirts printed up with that on. Okay, and working software, right? Working software being the primary measure of progress. So once again, this is something it's easy to say we do this. There's lots of organizations where it's very, very hard to get them to start measuring working software as the primary measure of progress. I've seen people get very, very, very concerned when I started saying, okay, until we have something delivered through into production, we're not into our production-like environment, whatever is that, we're not going to count it as progress because we don't have the evidence we can even deploy it into our production-like environment. And so all these things start piling up in the, on the almost complete on the board. But it's a way of focusing and making sure that we're not counting and feeling good about delivering something when there may be a bunch of hidden work to actually get it into production. And after a while, hopefully, that bugs people enough that they go ahead and say, okay, we need to get these environments and find a faster way of being able to deploy stuff through, because this is how we're actually going to measure our progress. Sustainable development. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. This doesn't mean you don't have any nights where you need to stay up late to fix something because something big is happening the next day. But if your whole way of designing the way you work is built around it being unsustainable, you're not following Agile. You're doing something else, and it will probably cost you more than you think it's gaining you. There's some interesting studies about how much work you can actually get done, and if you go from somebody working four focused hours when they're very refreshed, completely focused, and very efficient at what they're doing, and say, okay, now we're going to make those people work 12-hour days, it's not like you start getting 3 times as much done. You may get some more done. In some cases, some of the studies I've seen actually suggest that you may get less done, but you may get some more done, but it's not 3 times. It may not even be double. It might be a very small fraction than what you get if people are really focused on shorter or on for less amount of time, more focused on what they're doing. Okay, so let's go back and see how people rank principles. And let's see. About the polls, we need to clarify difficult to follow, difficult for whom? The organization or the team or the developer? What I was thinking in terms of, if we're trying to say we want to follow this principle, how easy is it as a whole, within what the development team is trying to do? Can you actually follow this, or do you find you start hitting roadblocks with everything, and it's really, really difficult either to get people on board, or because there's organizational pushback, or just because no one wants to do it? All people in room, great. All people online and virtual room, good. Some local and some remote. Online can be the worst. And Terrence, that's a good point. When you start having some people that are in the know and some people that aren't, it can be very, very difficult. Now, I've worked on some teams that had 3 team rooms across the United States where people were physically in a team room, and mostly they were working around a big video conference screen. They'd bring their laptops and sit there. If they could go off into a breakout room if they needed to do something a little bit different or work with someone one-on-one. But there are 3 locations, one in San Francisco, one in San Francisco, one in DC, and then one in Alabama. 4, and one in Philadelphia. They had multiple people in the same room working together, but they were working in front of a video conference screen. Then they had another 5 or 6 people that were completely remote working at home. And they had a couple different, you could join different rooms that just so if you needed to talk to somebody and not be in the main room, you could do that, and you'd break out into the kind of like breakout rooms. It actually worked very, very effectively. It wasn't easy to get to the point that people were willing to work like that, but it worked really, really well. Now, this particular team got together for a while, they'd get together 1 week out of every month. So there still was a lot of good, physically together interactions. But it worked a lot better than I thought it would, with having some people remote, some not. Now, what's really bad is if you've got a bunch of people working in the office and a bunch of people working online, and there's not really a way for the people that are online to, to holler out and talk to someone in the office, that's a horrible way to work. But technology, if you're creative in how you use it, you can get technology to work really, really well for even those mixed type setups. Okay, this is interesting. So down around 2, although it's interesting because we've got people just scattered all over it. Most efficient, effective method of conveying information is face-to-face. We've got some people saying they don't feel it's below the line. A lot of people saying they don't feel it's particularly important, um, and then all over the place. So that's interesting to see how widely distributed that is. Um, what I find interesting about this particular one is on teams I've worked with, the people that often, and this may or may not be the case here, the people that often see it as being least valuable are the ones who have not ever worked on a highly functioning team that is doing this. I don't know if that's the case for the people here, but it doesn't seem like it's very valuable until you've actually experienced it. What are we doing on some of these other ones here? So this one, okay, this one's, most everybody's above the line on this one of using working software as primary measure of progress. But it's interesting, there's a lot more difference in how easy it is to do than whether it's important or not. And some organizations make this very, very difficult to do. And it can be very hard to change the things in the organization that you need to in order to actually make this the primary measure of progress. In working with some stuff for the Treasury and the Federal Reserve Bank system, I remember putting lots of effort into reworking or rereading the change management processes to make sure we were actually able to deliver things quickly, instead of saying we can only do one deploy every 6 months in order to be able to have progress as we went. So these are just interesting, kind of see where the layout is on these things. This looks like the people say the thing that's most hardest is to promote sustainable development, but that's the thing that's hardest to follow, which I think is an interesting thing. And this skews a lot depending on if you're in the startup world. I'd expect this to be a lot harder. If you're in a large organization, lots of organizations try to do this. But according to this, maybe we're not doing a very good job of it. Okay, I'll put that one up and we'll jump back to, how do I get back to it? There we go. Okay. Next one, continuous excellence to attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. If we write bad code, it's going to be harder to change. It's going to be harder to be agile. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. This is one, like I mentioned before about the conversation, that I think we kind of overlook because we're still kind of even if we're working in sprints and stuff, it's easy to overlook the value of what can we leave out? How can we make this simpler? How can we do, if we've got something that is there any way to split this into 2 pieces, and one of these pieces is going to be more valuable to the user, and now we've got something simpler that's higher value, and we can get that through and deliver to the user, and then we can prioritize that next piece against everything else we could possibly work on. This is a hard thing for teams to do because we start thinking in terms of how things will fit together in the end instead of how they can be broken apart to be simple in what we deliver today. And self-organizing teams. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. I was working with one organization that was trying to get the team to do some particular things architecturally. And some of the developers were saying, this really doesn't make any sense for what we're trying to do here. So they looked into it and they said, well, maybe I just don't understand. So they started looking, and this was on a big cloud provider. They went and talked to the cloud provider and looked at what the cloud provider said about these things. The cloud provider basically said not to do what the organization was telling these people to do. So we had a conversation about it, some of the stuff on it, and eventually what got thrown out there is this is an organizational standard, so you have to do this. And I found that interesting, particularly because it went against what the cloud provider was actually saying the best way to use their offerings. So I said, well, that's great. If it's an organizational standard, can we talk to some of the teams that are using it? Because maybe we're not understanding it. Maybe there's some aspect of this that makes this work really well, even though the developers are saying all the evidence is this is not a good way to, not a good architecture for this. And then we found out, they said, oh, it's an organizational standard, but no other team is using it. And I found that interesting because it basically meant that we were in a situation where what everybody was being told to do, no one had actually successfully done. So you have to question, maybe the decision was being made at the wrong level. Maybe that was something that would have been better at the team level, or at least let a team try it and see if it worked, and then maybe it could float up to being an organizational standard. But in this case, it had been made an organizational standard, even though it went against what the cloud provider was saying, even though it went against a bunch of other things, and even though no one had successfully done it. So I think that's an interesting illustration of this because it's very easy to not do this in large organizations, even if you've got all the evidence that you should be doing this. And reflect and readjust. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts accordingly. So let's jump back here, see if, how do I get back to that? I think it was, no? I had a way to switch. There we go. Okay. So you see where everything laid out on this. Looks like the most important thing people are saying are the reflect and adjust. And most of us end up doing that in retrospectives. Okay, I'm not going to go into those much detail because I'm running short on time. So those are all the principles. I hope that was a good kind of overall reminder of what the principles are, because I think a lot of times we get so focused on the things we're doing to try to follow Agile that we forget what Agile actually says, and we end up inventing all kinds of things that may be more or less useful, but aren't actually based on what Agile says. The other thing I want to remind you, this is a radiometer. So I've got one here. Let's see if I put there where you see it. If I get this out in the sunlight, it will start spinning. When I was a kid, I remember seeing one of these at my great-grandpa's house in western Kansas. And my parents explained to me that what was is if you take all the air out and there's no friction slowing it down, then when the photons hit it, it will make it spin. So as an adult, I was actually looking for the one my grandpa had, but he as he got moved, when he moved later, it ended up probably getting broken or something. So years later, when his stuff was being sold as state sale, we couldn't find it. So I found one somewhere else. And I started looking at what makes it work. And it turned out what my parents said was actually what people believed at the time. But more modern research discovered, and better vacuums, discovered if you actually take all the air out of it, if you actually remove all the friction out of it, it doesn't actually spin in the sunlight. There's something about the thing that causes friction that actually enables it to work correctly. And this is something I think is a very useful thing to think about when it comes to thinking about Agile, that it's not that we're trying to remove all the friction from the way we work. We're trying to use the Agile principles to leverage the friction, lower the friction, yes, but then leverage the friction that's there to make us better and more able to deliver for our teams. So that covers what I want to talk about with this. We'll do a quick competitive quiz and give away a t-shirt here. I hope that was useful. If you do have to drop off before we finish the quiz, please watch for the invites coming out, particularly some of the AI ones with people from Google and the stuff from AWS, and then the other things about probability, I think is going to be very, very interesting. When you get those in a few hours, if you know of anyone, please forward it to them so they can get it on their calendar if it's something that they might be interested in. Okay, so now for the fun part. Oh, okay, so fill this out really fast. Just rank on 3 things. Talk was worth my time to attend. I'd recommend it to others, and I learned things that will help me succeed in my job. I like to check through these and kind of see as I try different things. So just drag those sliders back and forth. You've only got a few seconds. Let me put this here again, and then we're going to give away a t-shirt. Okay, we've got 5 seconds to finish filling it out. Oh, good. We've got 14 people. As many people as can. Please do this because it's really useful to me. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now we're moving on. Wait, one more person get their thing in. Okay, there we go. Okay, now to give away a shirt. So I do these chances to kind of game show style giveaway stuff, not really to test our knowledge as much as it gives us a chance to interact with things in ways that will help us remember them. So I encourage you to take advantage of this. See how many people we got joined up with it. I guess it doesn't tell me how many were. All right, 46 people. Okay, so that's pretty good. So we'll give you 5 more seconds to join. And like I said, we are giving away a shirt, either one of these, or if I don't have the right size of these, I have some of the face-to-face communication ones. These are printed in my very own basement right over there. Okay, 4 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Let's start. Okay, you get more points by answering fast. When following Agile, you should expect what? You should expect no friction. Everything will be easy. Friction being used to improve decisions, no one ever to disagree, or no tension between the principles. 32 answers in. All right, we got 35 answers in. Yes, we should expect friction to be used to improve decisions. We should expect some friction. The part of what Agile does is give us a way to see things that maybe are causing problems and slowing us down. That's going to create some friction as you decide how the principles work together to deliver stuff. Okay, next question. Oh, good. We got some more players. Answer fast to get more points. Which is not a problem with waterfall? Which of these things is not? Remember the not. Is it you don't have to wait to get value? Is it a problem, not a problem that it has more letters than Agile? Or is it that it delays evidence of progress? So which of these is not a problem with waterfall? Yes, this was tricky the way I worded it, but we got to add some things to keep it exciting. The fact that waterfall has more letters is not a problem with waterfall. However, the fact that you have to wait to get value is a problem, and the fact that it delays progress, evidence of progress, is a problem with waterfall. Tricky question, I know, but we'll help mix things up so different people win. Okay, answer fast, get more points. I think I've got a leaderboard coming up here. We'll see where people are doing. How do you build trust? Do you build trust by delivering something big, delivering documentation, delivering frequently, or building all the requirements? And this one's going to be a little bit tricky, but we did talk about it. Okay. Yes, delivering frequently. I actually expected to trip some people up with building all the requirements. You're going to build trust by delivering frequently. If we end up in a situation where we're building all the requirements, but it turns out what they ask for is not what they actually need, that's not going to establish trust, even though we did exactly what they asked for. Oh, and I just noticed Laura has her t-shirt on, so that is awesome. It's good to see that. Cool. Okay, next question. Okay, answer fast to get more points. And the question is, what should we value more? What should we value more? Should we value following a plan? Should we value comprehensive documentation? Should we value responding to change? Or should we value negotiating with customers? Yes, we should value responding to change. These are all things from we value this more than this, but the only one was the thing that we valued more was responding to change. We may want to negotiate with customers, but we want to value customer interaction more than negotiating with customers. I thought this would show a leaderboard in there a few places, but I'm not seeing it yet. Okay, successful teams do what? Successful teams use Scrum, use Safe, use both Scrum and Safe, deliver working software, or follow requirements documents. According to this talk, what would be the best answer for what successful teams do? Yes, they deliver working software. They may happen to use both Safe and Scrum, but if they use Safe and Scrum and they don't deliver working software, they're probably not going to be successful. Well, by definition, they're not successful. Okay, I'm glad to see we still got 48 people involved. I think 2 more questions here. What was the instrument Mark used as an example of friction benefiting Agile? I held up an instrument, and I don't think I told people what it was. So we'll just see if you can guess what it is. This will add a little bit of randomness to it. Yes, it is a radiometer. It's a radiometer is what this particular thing is called. I may not have said that this time, but that's okay. We could treat it like a random question. Okay, here's our leaderboard. I think, did we have one more question? I think we had one more. So it looks like Chris is in top spot, followed by Nick, Tom. Wow, these are very, very close scores right there. Kathy, Bridget, Ivy, KG, Frosty, Ashley, and Croc. I think we've got 7 to 8. Okay, 2 questions left. Almost there. Fast to get more points. How does Agile say we should primarily measure progress? Many ways to measure progress. Should we use story points, weighted shortest job first, return on investment, or working code? How does the Agile Manifesto say we should primarily measure progress? This one usually trips people up just a little bit. So it actually says working code. Return on investment is not a bad thing to measure, but that's not what's in the Agile Manifesto. Story points actually are not mentioned in the Agile Manifesto either, even though that's what a lot of people are using. But the problem is if we start measuring story points in ways that doesn't actually measure working code, we're probably not going to be delivering in an Agile way for our customers. Okay, let's see who's in top spot. Can Nick catch up with Chris? And Chris retains the top spot, followed by Nick, Tom, Kathy, Ivy, Bridget, KG, Kat, Croc, and Ashley. And I think, okay, last question. Here we go. Answer fast to get more points. According to this talk, trust is built more by what than what? So fill in the blank. Is it built more by magnitude than frequency? More by management than developers, more by words than actions, more by frequency than magnitude, or more by developers than management? According to this talk, yes. Trust is built more by frequency than magnitude. So doing trustworthy things really, really frequently, every few days, every week, or whatever, is better than delivering something big every year that has great magnitude. It's built more by the frequency of doing trustworthy things than magnitude. Okay, let's see who won here. We have... Okay, Chris takes the top spot. So Chris, send me an email, reply to something, the invite that I sent you. Let me know where to send it, your address, and t-shirt size, and I will get this in the mail to you. So thank you so much for coming, everybody. Okay, Nick. Oh, Chris already has a shirt. So Nick, are you still there, Nick? If you go, somebody asked, so Nick, go ahead and send me an email. Looks like you're the next person in the list. Send me an email, let me know your shirt size and an address, and I will get you a shirt. The backwards question, yes, did throw some things off. So people are asking, let me give you the link to the YouTube channel because it's up on the YouTube channel. If you want something beyond that, let me know and I'll see if I can get you it as a PDF. This Prezi's a little bit different, so it doesn't necessarily give me the it's not like a normal presentation. Stop the streaming here.